There's a message sitting in your phone from someone you used to call your best friend. It's been there for 3 days. You've read it. You just haven't answered. And the strange part isn't that you're avoiding it. The strange part is how little guilt you feel about it. Not because anything happened. There's no falling out, no bad blood, no explanation you could give someone else that would even make sense. It's something quieter than that, something harder to name. Like the part of you that used to respond immediately, the guy who made plans every weekend, who could talk for 2 hours about nothing and feel completely alive. That guy just stopped showing up, and you didn't decide to pull away. It just happened. If that sounds familiar, stay with this, because millions of men in their 30s are living this exact thing, not dramatically cutting people off, not ghosting with intention, just letting the distance quietly grow. And what this video is going to get into is why. The answer is more complicated and more understandable than it probably appears. This is about something men almost never put into words. The slow withdrawal from male friendship, not from bitterness, not from burnout in the obvious sense, but from something internal, something that builds quietly over years until one day you look up and realize your social world has shrunk to a fraction of what it was. By the end of this, something about your current life is probably going to make more sense. Not because something is wrong with you, but because naming what's actually happening is how it stops feeling like a personal failure. Think about the last time you genuinely looked forward to seeing someone, not out of obligation, not because you felt you should, just because you actually wanted to. For a lot of men in their 30s, that feeling has gotten harder to access, and there's a structural reason for that. One most men have never been told. Research in social psychology has consistently found that men tend to form close bonds through shared activity, doing things side by side, sport, work, regular proximity. You don't have to manufacture. Women are more likely to bond through direct conversation, face-to-face, processing things together out loud. Neither is wrong. They're just different architectures for connection. But here's where your 30s create a specific problem. The structures that supported male friendship, school, shared housing, team sports, the daily proximity that used to just exist, those things are mostly gone. Nobody's living down the hall. Nobody's on the same training schedule. There's no shared environment pulling you into each other's lives without effort. You have to actively build the proximity that used to just exist, and men already carrying the full weight of adult life often don't have the bandwidth to engineer it. So the friendships don't dissolve because of conflict. They dissolve because the scaffolding holding them up quietly fell away. And nobody noticed until the distance had already grown too large to casually bridge. When you look at what's actually happening underneath this withdrawal, there are 4 specific dynamics at work, not excuses, explanations. The first is what I call the divergence effect. When you're younger, your friends are basically living parallel versions of the same life, same stage, same freedom, similar problems, shared references. By your 30s, those parallel lines have split dramatically. Some of your old friends are married with kids. Some are still going out every weekend. Some have moved cities, changed careers, become entirely different people. The shared context that made conversation feel easy, the same daily rhythm, the same emotional universe, that starts a fracture, and what's left can feel uncomfortably thin. You sit across from someone you've known for 15 years, and halfway through the conversation, you realize you're running out of things to say that actually matter. That's not coldness. That's what happens when 2 people's lives stop rhyming. And instead of rebuilding a friendship on new terms, which requires honest, slightly uncomfortable conversation, Most men just let it drift because vulnerability feels awkward in a friendship that was built for something else. But the divergence is only part of it, because even when two people are still in the same emotional universe, even when the life paths haven't pulled too far apart, something else starts happening. The second dynamic is what I call performance tax. By your 30s, you've changed. Quietly, without announcing it. Your sense of humor has matured. Your priorities have shifted. The things that used to excite you don't move you the same way anymore. But some friendships were built around a version of you that no longer fully exists. The wild one, the one who was always down, the guy everyone could count on for a good time, no matter what was actually going on under the surface. Showing up to those friendships means performing that character again, and performance costs energy. It's not dishonesty exactly. It's more like wearing clothes that used to fit perfectly, but now pull in all the wrong places. You can still put them on. You can still go through the motions, but it accumulates. Eventually, it becomes easier to not show up, not because you don't care, because showing up as someone you're not anymore, over and over, is a specific kind of exhausting that's hard to explain without sounding ungrateful. The performance tax explains some of the avoidance, but it doesn't fully explain the withdrawal. Because some men pull back even from friendships where there's no performance pressure, where they could show up as themselves, where the comfort is real and the history is genuine. That's where the third dynamic comes in. Emotional bandwidth depletion. Men in their 30s are often carrying invisible weight. Career decisions with real consequences. Financial pressure that's no longer abstract. Relationship dynamics that require constant attunement. Maybe a kid who needs your full presence every evening. Maybe a parent whose health is changing. Maybe just a quiet, grinding pressure of still trying to figure out what your life is supposed to look like. All of that draws from the same well. And by the time a friend sends a message, by the time someone suggests making plans, by the time a phone call is expected, the well is often nearly empty. Friendship requires presence. Presence requires energy. Energy runs out. When the math doesn't balance, friendship gets quietly rationed. That's not cruelty. It's what happens when a man is holding too much, with nobody thinking to ask how heavy it's gotten. But arguably the most painful dynamic, the one men talk about least, isn't about energy or divergence or performance. It's about something more contradictory. The fourth dynamic is the depth paradox. The older you get, the less patience you have for conversation that goes nowhere. Small talk that fills time. Banter that feels like background noise. Updates about people you don't really know anymore. The same surface level loop, repeated at irregular intervals, calling itself friendship. At some point, you start wanting something real. The kind of conversation where you say something true and the other person actually hears it, where something meaningful actually passes between two people. But most male friendships weren't built for that. They were built for activity, for proximity, for the ease of being in the same space without needing to say much, which worked perfectly when you were doing things together. In your 30s, the doing slows down. What's left is conversation. And the friendship doesn't always have the structure to hold the kind of conversation you actually need now. So you end up with a choice that isn't really a choice. Surface level connection that leaves you feeling more alone after than before. Or vulnerable conversation in a friendship that was never designed for depth. Most men don't pick either. They go quiet. And here's the part that almost never gets said. The men who pull away from friendships aren't usually the ones with no capacity for connection. They're often the ones with more than average. They withdraw because they can feel the distance between what friendship could be and what it actually is. That gap between the depth they're capable of and the depth available to them is what makes silence feel preferable to going through the motions again. Here's what makes this heavier than it looks. The withdrawal isn't just about losing people. It's about losing access to a version of yourself that only existed around them. The guy you were at 24, the one who laughed more easily, carried less, hadn't yet accumulated the weight of the choices and half-choices and roads not taken. That version of you lives in old friendships, in the jokes that only make sense to certain people, in the history you can't explain to anyone who wasn't there. And when those friendships quietly fade, it can feel like that version of you fades with them. That's not just loneliness. That's grief. Men almost never name it that. They call it drifting apart. They call it life getting complicated. They say they've just been busy. But underneath it, sometimes, there's a quiet mourning for who you were before everything got so heavy. And the loneliness that follows this withdrawal isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It settles into a life that might look full from the outside. You're surrounded by people. You have obligations, routines, maybe a family. And still there's this feeling, quiet but persistent, that nobody really knows what's happening inside you. Not because you're broken, because you never found a way to show them. That's the part that's hardest to sit with. So, what do you do with any of this? Not to fix everything. Not to dramatically rebuild your social life starting next week. Just to see it more clearly. The first thing worth understanding is that a lot of men in their 30s aren't failing at friendship. They're trying to have the wrong kind. They're still chasing a version that worked at 24, proximity-based, activity-built, low maintenance by design, and wondering why it now feels empty or impossible. The version of connection that actually fits this stage of life looks different. It requires a little more honesty, a little more willingness to show up as who you actually are, not who people remember, not vulnerability as a performance, just saying something true when it's relevant. One conversation like that is worth more than a year of comfortable contact that goes nowhere. And the withdrawal itself, it's usually not what it looks like from the outside. It's not coldness. It's not a character flaw. It's often a man protecting his remaining energy, the only way that feels available, without a roadmap for anything different. Naming that matters, because when the internal story is, I'm just bad at friendships, you stay stuck in a shame loop that doesn't lead anywhere. When you understand the actual mechanics, the divergence, the performance tax, the bandwidth, the depth gap, you can start making intentional choices instead of just reacting to instinct. And finally, not every friendship needs to survive your 30s. That's not failure. That's honesty. Some connections were built for a season of life that's now over. Letting them go quietly isn't betrayal. It's recognition. The ones worth tending, you'll usually know them. They're the ones where, even across years of distance, there's still some bedrock of actual knowing each other that the divergence couldn't fully erode. Those are worth one honest conversation. Not to fix everything. Not to have a big emotional reckoning. Just to stop pretending nothing has changed. If something in this video felt accurate to something you've been quietly living, you don't have to have it figured out. Most men walking this road don't either. But here's a question worth sitting with. Is there someone in your life you've pulled back from? Not because anything happened, not because you stopped caring, but because the distance just quietly grew and neither of you did anything to stop it? Think about who that is for you. Not to fix it, just to be honest about it. Drop something in the comments if this landed. Not for advice, not to be told what to do, just to say it somewhere. Because sometimes that's the first honest move. There's more on this channel for the parts of men's lives that don't get talked about. Stay as long as it's useful.